Welcome back. This is Dear Woke Christian, the podcast, and this is our educational series. And so today we're going to be looking at how to read the Bible with a focus and emphasis on genres. I just want you to get a clear overview, if you will, of what genres are, how they play a role in what we understand in Scripture, how to understand difficulties that might come from them, as well as criticisms that come from using, or rather focusing on genres. Let's begin with a fun quiz and just kind of reviewing a little bit even about some of the things we talked about in context. So in Genesis 15:12, as the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell on Abram. Well, we know that the Bible has to be wrong because the sun doesn't go down, the earth rotates. Exodus 14:14, the Lord will fight for you, and you have only to be silent. This means that you need to stop putting effort into improving yourself. Let go and let God. Exodus 20:13, you shall not murder. Well, obviously, God isn't in control here because people have murdered other people. And they've stolen, they've lied, they've coveted too. Joshua 2:11, our hearts melted, and there was no spirit left in any man because of you. Rahab believed that Canaanites could live without their hearts. Matthew 5:29, if your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. This clearly says that we should mutilate our bodies if they form a stumbling block for us. Proverbs 18:21, death and life are in the power of the tongue. This means we should use our words to kill people or even raise people from the dead. Ephesians 2:5, when you were dead in your trespasses, he made you alive together with Christ. See, Paul taught that we die when we sin and that Christians are really zombies. Revelation 13:18, let the one who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. The number is 666. This means that the number 666 is Satan's number and brings bad omens whenever it shows up. Well, we all know that many of those examples were extremely out of context and were not being used properly. And all of them buttress up against some form of genre. So let's look at genres and see what the genres are, and then we can better understand how to properly deal with those previous questions. So what is genre, Jason? A genre is a style of writing that an author employs for written communication. Authors express their thoughts through different communication modes. It's raining cats and dogs. I'm pulling your leg. He's in the doghouse. Meaning is not necessarily due to the sum of the words of the sentence. Genres exist to help us facilitate the meaning of a word or writing. So there are 5 main literary genres in the Bible. Some interpreters separate apocalyptic from prophecy, while some interpreters combine dialogues and narratives. Each main genre has a number of subgenres underneath it. And so let's look at some of those now. Normally, the genre is determined by content and intent, which is why the same event can be represented differently in, for example, Genesis 1 and Psalm 19. The Bible never corrects itself when using different genres for the same story. There can be multiple ways to understand a passage. So let's jump into some of them. Some of the difficulties that come into play. Genres in English literature are distinct from biblical genres. A book in one genre can switch to another one without notice. There are rules for interpreting different genres and subgenres. Not all of these rules will apply at the same time in the exact same way. Genres can influence books of the Bible, even of a different genre. Adam as a gardener in Genesis 2:15, and Jesus as a gardener in John 20:15. Jerusalem in Psalm 48, and the New Jerusalem in Revelation 21. The end times according to Jesus in Mark 13, as well as Paul in Titus 2:13 through 14. The basics of biblical genres. All right, let's look at these. First, we have narratives. This is a recounting of an event, physical historical that has already happened. This includes war history, reigns of kings, travel narratives, miracles, and the such. The Bible is about 60% narrative. Narrative isn't necessarily normative. It's not right because it's there. Sarai shouldn't have given Hagar to Abram in Genesis 16, and Abram shouldn't have taken Hagar. Jephthah's vow, Judges 11:29-40, should never have been made and should never have been kept. Eli was a terrible father in 1 Samuel 1 Samuel chapters 2-3. Job's friends shouldn't have said anything to him. So some examples of narratives are Genesis through Exodus, Joshua through Esther, Daniel 1 through Daniel 6, the whole book of Jonah, the Gospels, as well as Acts. Now, there's some subgenres as well. Subgenre could be historical, gospel, or genealogical. Now we have prophecies, a visceral message from God to his people about the present or future, a forceful reminder to God's people of the terms of his covenant. So we look at that and we see there's prophecy is either forthtelling or foretelling. Forthtelling is when God holds his people to his law. Foretelling is when God tells what is going to happen in the future. The overwhelming vast majority of prophecy is forthtelling. About 22% of the Bible is prophecy. So some examples would be Isaiah through Malachi, and of course, Revelation. Some subgenres would be predictive, didactic, and apocalyptic. Now we got poetry, and we're all familiar with poetry, so let's look into it a little bit more closely. Poetry, a prosaic expression of feelings toward God or one's circumstances, based upon narrative and mostly framed by patterns of thought. Synonyms, synthetic and antithetic parallelisms, similes, metaphors, chasms, inclusions, acrostics, personifications. Like any epistle, it tells us of the author's reaction to various narratives. So, an example would be the book of Job all the way through Song of Solomon, then also Lamentations. So, some subgenres would be songs, praise, wisdom, proverbs, romance, and lament. Now we got discord. Any mostly verbal conversation that one party has with another party. They are normally found within a larger overarching narrative. What is said can sometimes be wrong or misguided. So for example, 1 Kings 1 Kings 20:28. The Lord is a God of the hills, but he is not a God of the valleys. John 8:48. Are we not right in saying that you, Jesus, are a Samaritan and have a demon? Or Acts 12:22. This is the voice of a God and not of a man. So some examples of discord would be Leviticus, Deuteronomy, Sermon on the Mount, all of Paul's defenses. Subgenres, there's dialogues, monologues, sermons, laws, and parables. Epistles, a direct communication from one party to another, situated within historical events, but doesn't have to reference them. This clearly expresses the normative teachings of the Bible. So Romans chapters 1-11 is indicative, whereas Romans 12-16 is imperative. Titus 3:4-7 is the most thorough passage on the New Testament teachings, whereas James 3:1-12 is a biblical teaching on controlling the tongue. So some examples would be the book of Romans all the way through Jude. Some subgenres would be didactic, polemic, and situational. Here's some criticisms that come up when you're dealing with genres. But we need to take the Bible literally. Response. Yes, according to how the author wants us to understand their book. By the way, Paul apparently wanted us to take at least one thing figuratively, and that would be Galatians 4:24. You don't take the book of Revelation literally, but I do. I understand it literally according to the genre and intent of the author, but you take it literalistically, restricting its meaning to the bare words alone, apart from the context and the author's intent. You're just trying to mask over the contradictions of the Bible. The Bible justifies itself when you just let it communicate organically, like you do with everyone else. Humanity has communicated with each other via diverse genres even since we've been created. And that's in Genesis 2:23. This is why we often say things that aren't literally true. I'm starving, I'm dead, and so forth. You're making the Bible hard to understand with all this genre stuff. The multiplicity of biblical narratives flows from an infatude of God and the manifold wisdom of his revelation to us. And have you ever tried to understand the Trinity? Yeah, I thought so. By looking at this stuff, you're putting God in a box. A response. No, that's just the way that he communicates to us. Also, that phrase, putting God in a box, is utilizing a non literal genre. So I can't even make sense of what that phrase is without understanding how genres work. So here's some difficulties that come up when dealing with genres. And these are some questions that you can ask yourself while you're reading the scriptures. So, first one, let's look at narrative. How do we know whether this event is normative? Which details in the story are important to the author's message? And what is the event supposed to teach us? Now, dealing with prophecy, what are the circumstances of the author and what are they referring to? How should we interpret prophecy when it uses poetry? How are we supposed to understand apocalyptic literature? Now, going to poetry. How much poetic license should we give this passage? Are the headings above the Psalms inspired like the Psalm itself? How do we discern what is to be taken as hyperbole? Discourse. How do we know whether this discourse represents what is normative? How do we understand the moral, civil, and ceremonial laws to apply nowadays? What parts of the parable stand for what things in real life? And epistles. What is the circumstances of the authors and the recipients? How much of the circumstances matter to the understanding of the passage? How are we supposed to understand the author's flow of logic? How does the author use quotations, whether it's from the Old Testament or elsewhere? Is the author speaking universally or about something specific to that audience? And then, is the book of Revelation apocalyptic or an epistle? So, those are just some questions I think that would help you, and just a very quick overview of genres that I think would help you understand them and recognize how they're being used in scripture as you're reading. So, thank you again so much for checking this out. Feel free to review this video again. The slides will be down in the description below. And until next time, everybody, grace and peace.